used to love the ocean, the sound of the waves, the endless horizon. It felt like freedom. To me, the beach meant summer, friendship, and the best memories of my life. That all changed one weekend. I was 16. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. And it was unforgettable, but for all the wrong reasons. We were just kids living in a moment of pure bliss. We felt safe. We felt invincible. Splash, 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 splash. That was the sound that shattered our world. It was the sound of our perfect night turning into a nightmare. It wasn't just a robbery. And for years I thought that was the end of the story. But I was wrong. The truth was much, much darker. And the real horror was still waiting for us, hidden on a deserted island years later. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear isn't something I was born with. It's a direct result of a terrifying experience I'm about to tell you. On this channel, I've shared many horror stories, from ghost encounters to paranormal events, some of which you guys have even said would make for a great horror animation, almost like something you'd see from a creator, like MJV Animations. But today's story is different. It's based on a true scary story from my own life. As a kid, I used to love the shore more than anything. I can still close my eyes and feel the eager anticipation that would build up all week, waiting for the weekend when my family and I would pack up the car and head to our beach house. Some weekends were even better. If I was lucky, my parents would let me spend it at my friend Charles's beach house, which for a teenager was a whole different level of fun. This story takes place during one of those special summer weekends. I was 16, that perfect age where you feel like you're on top of the world, like nothing can touch you. It was me, Charles, and our third friend, Riley. The three of us were about to spend a few completely unsupervised days at Charles's family beach house in LBI, Long Beach Island, New Jersey. For three teenage boys, this was the ultimate taste of freedom. Riley was a year older than Charles and me and had just recently gotten his driver's license. That little piece of plastic was our golden ticket. We'd be driving down in his beat-up but beloved car, and the world felt like it was ours. The drive down was fantastic. It was one of those perfect summer days where the sun is bright, but not too hot. We had the windows down, terrible music blasting from the speakers, and not a care in the world. Riley was, to put it mildly, a pretty uncoordinated driver back then. Most of the ride was spent with us in the back, laughing hysterically at him swerving just a little too much or cursing at some other driver for a mistake that was clearly his own. It was great. We made it down to LBI in what felt like record time, the salty air hitting us the moment we got out of the car. The first thing we did was haul all of our stuff, mostly junk food, video games, and a few bags of clothes from the car into our rooms. Now, the layout of the house is actually important to the story, so I need to explain it briefly. It was a classic LBI lagoon front house. There was the main front door and a garage door that had a connecting door inside, linking the back of the house to the front yard. At the back of the house, facing the water, there was a large sliding glass door that opened up to a patio. Upstairs, the bedrooms had their own deck that wrapped around the back, and the coolest part, or so we thought at the time, was a spiral staircase that led directly from that upstairs deck down to the ground. It meant you could sneak in and out from the second floor without anyone ever knowing. The house sat right on a lagoon, a narrow channel of water with a row of houses on the opposite side. each with its own dock stretching out into the murky water. Our friends used to joke that it was a haunted beach house. We were at that ripe, slightly embarrassing age where chasing girls was our absolute number one priority. Having a nice beach house all to ourselves, with no parents around, was the perfect bait. We spent the first few hours scrolling through our phones, figuring out which girls we knew were also down the shore for the weekend, and sending out hopeful messages on Snapchat. Finally, our efforts paid off. We found a group of 3 really cute girls who said they'd be down to come hang out at Charles's place. Their names were Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie. The plan was perfect. I had managed to bring more than enough weed to last us the entire weekend, and before we left, we had each raided our parents' liquor cabinets, snagging a few bottles of whatever we could get our hands on. It was the perfect setup for what we thought would be the greatest night of our young lives. It felt like the beginning of one of those truly creepy stories you'd see in a horror animation compilation titled That Cursed Night with Friends. And for a while it was. Things were going incredibly well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and it didn't take long for the 3 of us to feel like we were living in some teen movie. The energy was electric. At one point, the 6 of us decided to move the party to the backyard pool. It wasn't a huge pool, but it was heated, and it was perfect for 6 slightly drunk and giddy teenagers. I remember that moment vividly, almost like a photograph burned into my memory. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly into the night air, mixing with the puffs of smoke from the joints we were passing around. At our age, this was pure bliss. Nothing could go wrong. But then it did. Suddenly, without a word, Charles reached over and turned the music all the way down. The laughter and conversation died instantly, replaced by a tense silence. He was staring over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, trying to see what he was looking at. I could roughly make out the shapes of the houses on the other side of the lagoon, their lights twinkling in the distance. But I wasn't sure what had caught his attention. One of the girls, Alexa, asked Charles why he turned the music down. He didn't look away from the opposite shore. He just whispered, "I saw someone standing on the dock over there, the one opposite the house." I figured he was just trying to spook us, creating a chilling narrative for a future video, something like my scariest stalker experience, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live there," I said, trying to bring the mood back. Charles finally turned to look at us, and his face was serious. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice low. "I know that family personally. My parents are friends with them. They're in Florida for the week." Honestly, I still thought he was just messing around, or maybe he was just a little too high. So I kept chuckling, trying to brush it off, but the girls were starting to get a little freaked out. They said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started climbing out of the pool, the fun atmosphere completely gone. As we were drying off on the patio, Riley suddenly jumped and cursed, staring out towards the lagoon. The rest of us immediately turned, and even though the light was dim, this time I saw it too. There was definite movement coming from the opposite dock, marking the start of a real-life home invasion horror story. The 6 of us froze in place, our eyes straining to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, A passing car on the road across the lagoon lit up the scene for a split second, and the sight was horrifying. It wasn't one person. There were 4 tall, dark, mysterious silhouettes standing at the very edge of the dock, perfectly still, facing directly towards us. Their presence was so ghostly, it sent a chill down my spine. "Go inside now," Charles said, his voice trembling as he pushed us toward the sliding door. We all rushed inside, and as I was about to follow, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I have ever heard in my life. A sound that plays over and over in my nightmares. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from the darkness behind us. Splash, 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 splash. They weren't just watching anymore. The only thought in my head was that this felt just like that video titled, "They Came from the Water, a True Horror Story." They were swimming across the lagoon. They were coming for us. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The sound of those splashes was like a gunshot in the dead of night. It instantly turned our fear into raw, primal terror. This was a disturbing, true home invasion horror in the making. The girls let out terrified screams while Riley, reacting on pure instinct, slammed the heavy sliding glass door shut and fumbled with the lock until we heard it click into place. The sound was small, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing between us and whatever was swimming across that dark water. Charles, his face pale with fear, quickly ran to the front of the house to lock the main door. The 6 of us then scrambled, tripping over each other into a small den, the only room in the house that wasn't visible from the outside. We huddled together in the dark, a tangled mess of limbs and panicked breaths. No one dared to speak. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart, which felt loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear anything. Footsteps on the patio, a hand on the door handle, anything. A few minutes passed, each second stretching into an eternity. Still nothing. The silence was almost worse than the noise. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with unspoken questions. Did they give up? Did they swim away? Or were they just waiting, watching us from the darkness, enjoying our fear? It was a real-life, unsolved mystery unfolding, the kind of story that sticks with you forever. Then out of nowhere, Riley cursed under his breath, a sharp, guttural sound that made us all jump. He looked at Charles, his eyes wide with horror. "The deck," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I forgot to lock the sliding door on the upstairs deck." A wave of cold dread washed over me. Charles started to panic, running his hands through his hair. He knew his house better than any of us. He knew about the spiral staircase. He knew that an unlocked door upstairs was just as bad as leaving the front door wide open. This house was about to be broken into, and we were trapped inside. It felt like we were living in one of those terrifying horror stories. And just then, as if summoned by our worst fears, we heard it. It started as a faint creak from the floorboards above us. Then, soft, quieted footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and stealthy. This wasn't someone stumbling around in the dark. This was someone who was trying not to be heard. Someone who was already inside. This was a true, scary story of survival. That was the last straw. The idea of hiding and waiting was gone. There was no plan, no strategy, just the overwhelming primal need to get out. None of us had any weapons on hand. and we were all intoxicated and terrified. Fighting was not an option. Running was our only chance. "The car," I whispered, and that was all it took. The six of us sprinted for the front door as one. Charles fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking, and then we were out, bursting into the cool night air. We bolted across the front lawn to Riley's car, which was parked in the driveway. Riley somehow managed to get the keys into the ignition in a flash, and the engine roared to life. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle. In his panicked haste to get away, he threw the car into reverse, stomped on the gas, and completely destroyed Charles's family mailbox on the way out of the driveway. The sound of crunching metal was jarring, but we didn't care. We just needed to be far, far away from that house. Once we were several blocks away, feeling a sliver of safety, we pulled over and called the police. Explaining the situation over the phone was a nightmare. We were a bunch of scared, rambling teenagers trying to make sense of something that felt completely unreal, like something out of a creepy pasta. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing police lights, interviews, and the uncomfortable feeling of being looked at as just a bunch of irresponsible kids. We eventually went back to the house, but only after the police had searched it and declared it clear. The news they gave us was shattering. All the valuables on the top floor were missing. Laptops, jewelry, cash. But that wasn't the worst part. Charles's family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat, which was usually docked right behind the house. It was also stolen, most likely used as the getaway vehicle. The police explained their theory. Charles's father, a creature of habit, always tended to keep a spare set of boat keys inside a small hidden hatch just below the steering wheel. The police concluded that this was how the culprits got away so quickly. They didn't have to hotwire it. They just had to know where to look. But that raised the most chilling question of all, a question that I still wonder about to this day. How did they know where that key was hidden? The police were never able to find the boat or arrest the perpetrators. It was like they vanished into the night. It remains an unsolved mystery. Charles, Riley, and I always had our own theory. We think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles's family. Someone who knew they were in Florida. Someone who knew the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend. And someone who knew exactly where to find the key to their escape. This entire event could be turned into a full horror animation titled "The Night They Came from the Water." It's been a long time since that chilling event took place, but its shadow has never really left me. I haven't let a single day pass without double and triple checking every door and window in my home. So do yourself a favor. Before you go to sleep tonight, get up and lock your doors. You never know who might be watching from the darkness. For years, that was where the story ended. It became a piece of my personal history. A chilling, true story I thought would forever be an unsolved mystery. The memory of it was like a scar. It healed, but the mark was always there. A constant reminder of how quickly safety can turn into terror. The incident solidified into a chilling story we'd occasionally tell. A tale that could have been its own horror narration titled "The Night We Never Spoke of Again." As far as I knew, the authorities never found the boat, the thieves were never caught, and the mystery of who they were and how they knew so much about Charles's family was left to fade into unresolved history. Life, as it tends to do, moved on. Charles and I, who had been inseparable for years, slowly drifted apart after high school. We went to separate colleges in different states, and from there, Our paths diverged even further as we moved to different cities to start our careers. We'd exchange the occasional text on a birthday or a holiday, but the deep bond we once shared was a casualty of time and distance. So it's not like I was in a position to receive constant updates about the situation. The robbery became a sealed file in the back of my mind, a cold case I assumed I would never have closure on. But then something completely unexpected happened. I recently caught up with Charles at a high school reunion that we both, by some twist of fate, coincidentally attended. And that reunion is update. To be honest, I wasn't even planning on going to the reunion. The whole idea felt a bit cliché, a bit forced. But my girlfriend at the time convinced me it might be fun to see how everyone turned out. It'll be an adventure, she'd said. So I figured, what the hell? I booked a flight back to my hometown, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and curiosity. I ended up flying solo, which is never the most fun way to walk into a room full of faces you haven't seen in a decade. But the moment I stepped into the venue, a rented-out event hall that smelled faintly of cheap perfume and nostalgia, I was pleasantly surprised. The first person I saw, standing in a circle with a few other guys from our old friend group, was Charles, and right next to him was Riley. It was a cool but surreal moment, all at the same time. You know that feeling, seeing people you haven't spoken to in years who look exactly the same but also completely different. Their faces were the same, but they were filled out with age and experience. It was like looking at a ghost from the past, but the ghost was older and had a mortgage. I walked over and joined the circle, and after the initial awkward handshakes and long time no sees, it was actually really nice catching up. We fell back into our old rhythm surprisingly easily, trading stories about jobs, relationships, and the strange winding paths our lives had taken. As the night went on, the big loud crowd started breaking off into smaller, more intimate groups. At one point, Charles pulled Riley and me to the side, away from the noise. "Hey," he said with a grin, "you guys want to grab a drink at some random bar after this thing wraps up? For old times' sake." Riley unfortunately couldn't make it. I think he had an early flight the next morning or something, work-related, but I was definitely game. The idea of a quiet drink after the sensory overload of the reunion sounded perfect. So, an hour or so later, Charles and I found ourselves at this little dive bar a few blocks away. It was the kind of place with sticky floors, a great jukebox, and beer that was cheap and cold. We sat in a worn-out booth, just reminiscing about old times. We talked about everything. Stupid things we did in high school, teachers we hated, parties we barely remembered. It was easy, comfortable. I can't exactly remember how, but eventually that night at his beach house floated into the conversation. It was bound to happen. It was too big of a memory, our own personal, true scary story, to not come up. As soon as it did, a strange look crossed Charles's face. He suddenly slapped his hand down on the wooden table, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet bar. It was like he had just remembered something he hadn't been thinking about for a long time, something significant. "Dude," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "I never told you what happened after that. A terrifying discovery was made. Well, not by me, but by my brother." I should mention that as he started talking, I actually pulled out my phone and started writing some of this down in my notes app. I wanted to make sure I could tell this story as accurately as possible, or at least as accurately as Charles told it to me. I knew this would make for a great video, perhaps titled, "I reunited with my friend after 10 years and he told me this. Because what he said next was pretty wild. It was a thread from that night. A thread I thought had been cut and discarded years ago, but it turned out it had been dangling there all along, waiting to be pulled. The story wasn't over. The horrifying truth was just beginning to unfold. So Charles starts explaining that his little brother Kieran is 19 now, and apparently he and his friends are way bigger troublemakers than we ever were back in the day. A classic case of teenagers making bad decisions. He then tells me about an incident that happened about a year ago, which turned into what sounds like one of those disturbing horror stories you hear online, a truly scary boat trip. One summer afternoon, Kieran and two of his friends decided, without asking for permission, to take the family's new boat out for a spin. This was their replacement boat, by the way, the one they got after the insurance payout from the original Boston whaler that was stolen from us all those years ago. Their plan was to take it out for what was supposed to be a late afternoon trip along the coast. Of course, being teenage boys, they had also brought along a bunch of beer that they were planning to drink while out on the water. It was an incredibly stupid and dangerous idea, not to mention highly illegal since they were all underage. But as Charles said, it gets worse. He told me that they were feeling adventurous that day, so they decided to head out and anchor near a place called Clam Island. Now, I had to look this up later, but apparently it's technically part of the Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. It's a protected area, and you're definitely not supposed to be there at night. This was the perfect setup for a classic horror story, trespassing on a forbidden island. Their brilliant plan was to anchor the boat as close as they could safely get to the island, kill the bears, and then swim to shore to hang out and watch the stars or whatever else teenage boys do on a deserted island. So that's exactly what they did. They anchored the boat, swam to shore, and found a nice, secluded spot on the beach. They were just sitting there, waiting for the sun to go down, talking and laughing, when one of Kieran's friends noticed another boat. It was anchored further down the shore, partially hidden by a bend in the coastline. They hadn't seen it when they first arrived. Kieran, curious, took a closer look at this other boat. And this is where the story takes a sharp, unbelievable turn. This is the part that could be a video all on its own, titled, "He Found His Family Stolen the Boat Years Later," and what he saw was horrifying. From what Charles told me as Kieran squinted at the distant vessel, he became convinced that it looked exactly like their family's old Boston whaler, the one that got stolen. Now, Charles admitted he had a hard time believing this part of the story himself. He reminded me that the boat was pretty far away, and it was getting dark out, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon. The odds of it being the boat, still in the same area after all these years, seemed astronomically low. But according to Charles, Kieran was absolutely certain he wouldn't even entertain the possibility that this was just some random similar-looking boat. It was a gut feeling, a deep, unsettling sense of recognition that uncovered a deep, dark secret, the kind of twist you see in the best animated horror stories. So, Kieran convinces his friends that they have to get a better look. Fueled by a mixture of alcohol and adrenaline, they decide to swim out to it, and that's exactly what they do. The three of them slip back into the water and swim all the way out there. By the time they reach the mysterious boat, panting and treading water beside its hull, Kieran is 100% convinced. These specific decals, the custom rod holders, a distinct scratch on the side he remembered from years ago. It was all there. It was his family's old boat. Here's where it gets frustrating though. Kieran, in a moment of rare foresight, realized he needed proof. He wanted to take pictures of the boat to show his parents, but in their haste to swim to the island, they had obviously left their phones back on their own boat. The sun was setting fast, and by the time they swam back to their boat, got their phones and returned, it would have been too dark to get any clear photos. One of Kieran's friends, the most level-headed of the group, suggested the obvious: call the police right now. But Kieran and his other friend were terrified of getting in trouble. They had been drinking underage. They had taken their parents' brand new boat out without permission, and they were trespassing in a wildlife refuge after hours. In their panicked minds, calling the cops felt like turning themselves in for a list of crimes. It was basically the last thing Kieran wanted to do. Instead, they came up with a new, flawed plan. They decided to just swim back to their boat, drive it over next to the other boat to get some quick pictures with their phones, and then they would figure out what to do once they got back home and could share the evidence to their parents. So, they started the long swim back. To shorten the distance, they swam back to the shore first, planning to walk on the beach to where their boat was anchored. And as they were trudging through the wet sand, exhausted from the swim, one of Kieran's friends happened to turn around and look back down the beach. What he saw was a truly terrifying encounter. There was a man walking towards them from the direction of the stolen boat. Charles said that Kieran was positive that the man picked up his speed the second they turned around, his casual walk breaking into a determined stride. It was like he was pursuing them, and then Kieran saw what he was holding. This was a creepy true stalker on a deserted beach. According to him, this person appeared to be carrying a shovel over his shoulder. A shovel on a deserted beach at dusk. That was the scariest part. The boys didn't wait to ask questions. They ran. This was now a real-life chase story, and it was absolutely horrifying. As soon as they started running, the guy started running after them. They sprinted as fast as their legs could carry them through the soft, unforgiving sand, their hearts pounding in their chests. They scrambled back to their boat, and just before he climbed aboard, Kieran looked back one last time, and he saw that the man with the shovel was now running in the opposite direction, presumably back towards his own boat, which was significantly closer to his position than theirs was. It was as if he had given up the chase, deciding to make his own escape instead. The boys reached their boat, scrambling aboard with a desperate energy. But here's the thing about escaping on the water, especially after sunset in New Jersey. It's not like in the movies. This was a slow-motion nightmare escape, a really disturbing and tense situation. There are all these regulations about how fast you can go in certain channels and what specific navigation lights you need to have on. So it wasn't like they could just gun it out of there, leaving a massive wake behind them. They had to follow the speed limits, which I can only imagine made the entire ordeal even more nerve-wracking. The slow, methodical pace, all while knowing that a man with a shovel could be getting into his own boat ready to follow. That also meant any idea of making a quick detour to get pictures of the other boat was completely out of the question. Their only priority was to get home. Charles said that Kieran described the ride back as the most tense, horrifying experience of his entire life. It was a true story that could be titled "The Longest Night Being Followed in the Dark." And I believe it, just knowing that someone could be following you in the pitch black darkness of the open water, being able to hear nothing but the sound of your own engine, unable to speed away. It's the stuff of nightmares. Kieran told Charles he wasn't sure whether they were actually followed or not. but for the entire journey back, he could have sworn he heard the faint, distant hum of another boat's engine somewhere in the darkness behind them. It could have been paranoia, or it could have been real. They never found out. Once they finally made it back to the dock behind the house, their relief was short-lived. Kieran's friends, now safely on land, immediately started pushing him to call the police. The reality of what they had just seen and experienced was crashing down on them. But Kieran still refused. He was adamant, saying he was more scared of his parents finding out what they had done. The drinking, the stolen boat, the trip to a restricted island, than he was of the horrifying truth of what they saw out there, a truth that sounded like a chilling campfire tale. But the guilt and fear didn't just go away. It ate him alive that night. The image of the man with the shovel, the impossible reappearance of the stolen boat, it was too much to keep inside. The next day, he came clean to his parents in what became the confession that changed everything, the climax of this whole insane, scary story. He told them everything, all except for the drinking detail, which Charles only found out about because Kieran, his older brother, was the one person he could confess that part to later on. Charles said his parents were more furious at Kieran than he ever remembers them being at him, which is saying a lot. His dad's anger was explosive. He banned Kieran from using the beach house for the rest of the summer, among many, many other punishments. But their anger was mixed with a deep, familiar sense of unease. They ended up reporting what Kieran saw to the authorities, telling them the story of the boat and the man on the island. But just like with our original incident, Charles said that nothing ever came of it. The police took the report, maybe sent a patrol boat out to the island the next day, but they found nothing. No boat, no man, no freshly dug holes. Just like before, the police were all but useless and the case went cold again. At that point in Charles's story in the bar, I had to interrupt him. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. How could that boat still be in use around LBI all these years later without anyone recognizing it? I asked. And why would someone anchor it so close to shore, even on a deserted island, if it was stolen? And most importantly, what was the man with the shovel really doing? Charles took a long sip of his beer and admitted he didn't have solid answers to any of those questions. His best guess about the boat was that whoever stole it must have altered it in some way, stripped it of its identifying numbers, maybe gave it a new paint job, just enough to avoid suspicion from a casual glance. It's not like every boat owner in the area has the registration numbers of a boat stolen a decade ago memorized. As for why they'd anchor so close to shore, maybe they felt comfortable because it was a restricted wildlife refuge, a place where most people wouldn't dare to go, especially at night. It was the perfect way of hiding in plain sight. But my biggest questions were about the guy with the shovel. When I asked Charles about that, he just shrugged, a look of genuine confusion on his face. "Who knows, man?" he said quietly. "It's a disturbing mystery. Maybe he was burying something, or maybe he was digging something up. Either way, whatever he was doing, it was enough to spook Kieran and his friends so badly that they ultimately confessed to a series of mistakes that Kieran would normally have taken to his grave. And that was pretty much it. That's where the story ended for the second time. Charles and I talked for a little while longer, the conversation lighter now, but the dark cloud of that story hung over our table. Soon, it was time to leave. We paid the bill, walked out into the cool night air, and said our goodbyes with a promise to not let another decade pass before we saw each other again. Driving back to my hotel that night, I still had no idea what to make of most of it. Hearing the story, definitely didn't give me any closure about what happened to us when we were 16. If anything, all it did was tear open that old wound and pour salt in it. It opened up a whole another can of worms, a new set of terrifying unanswered questions that will most likely be left unresolved forever. The robbery was never just a robbery, was it? It was connected to something else. Something that required a shovel on a deserted island in the middle of the night. And that reveals a dark secret buried on a deserted island, the kind of creepy plot twist that makes for the best horror stories, a thought far more terrifying than simply losing a boat. This is why some secrets should stay buried.